Centralia, Pennsylvania, was a small town. It was in the coal region of eastern Pennsylvania. This area is called the anthracite coal region. Centralia was built on top of rich coal seams. Coal mining was its life. Most people who lived there worked in the mines, or they worked in jobs that supported the mines. The town had churches, it had a post office, there were stores, there were homes. It was a normal American town, a quiet place. People knew their neighbors, they knew about hard work. They knew about coal, the town's population was never huge, but it was a community. It had a history. The land beneath it was a network of tunnels. These tunnels were from years of mining. Miners dug deep, they dug wide, they took out the coal, this left empty spaces. These spaces would become important later. No one knew it then. The town was just living its life, a life centered on the black rock under its feet. Then came May 27th, 1962. This day changed everything for Centralia. The town council had a problem. They needed to clean up the town dump. The dump was an old strip mine pit. It was just outside town. People threw their trash there. It was getting full. It was also a health hazard. Their rats were a problem. The smell was bad. So, the council decided to clean it up. Their plan was simple. They would set the trash on fire. This was a common way to deal with dumps back then. They would burn the trash, then they would cover the ashes. They hired a few local firefighters to do it. The firefighters started the burn. They let it burn for a while, then they put out the visible flames. They covered the smoldering refuse with dirt. They thought the job was done, but they made a mistake. A big mistake. The dump was in an old mining pit. It had an exposed coal seam. The coal was right there. At the bottom of the pit, the firefighters thought they put out all the flames, but some of the fire found its way. It found the coal seam, maybe through a small opening, maybe through a crack in the rock. The fire was hidden now. It was under the ground. No one realized this at first. The fire kept burning, but it was burning slowly. It was burning out of sight. It was burning the coal. The coal underground was fuel. Lots of fuel. More fuel than anyone could imagine. The fire just kept going. It smoldered, it spread, it ate at the coal, it moved further down. It moved into the old mine tunnels. A few days later, on May 29th, smoke came out of the ground. It was near the dump. This was a sign. A bad sign. The firefighters tried to put it out again. They dug, they poured water, they thought they had it, but the fire was already too deep. It was already too far gone. They were fighting a surface fire, but the real fire was beneath them. It was moving. It was growing. It was out of reach. The initial attempts to put it out failed. Well, they failed because no one understood what they were fighting. They thought it was just a dump fire. They thought it was just trash burning. They didn't know it was a coal mine fire. They didn't know it was burning the very foundation of their town. This misunderstanding sealed Centralia's fate. The fire started small. It started with a simple act, but it became something massive. Something unstoppable. It became the end of Centralia. The hidden fire kept burning. It went from the dump site. It moved into the network of old coal mines. These mines were like a maze under the town. The fire had all the fuel it needed. Anthracite coal burns hot. It burns slow. It burns for a very long time. This fire was in its perfect environment. It's underground, protected from rain, protected from surface efforts. It just ate away at the coal. Weeks went by, then months. People started noticing things. Smoke appeared in new places. It came from the ground. It came from cracks in the roads. It came from people's basements. The ground felt warm. Some places were very hot. The air smelled funny. It smelled like sulfur. A rotten egg smell. This was a sign of burning coal. Carbon monoxide gas was also being released. This gas is odorless. It is deadly. The town council kept trying to fight the fire. They dug trenches. They tried to cut off the fire's path. They pumped water into the ground. But these efforts were too small. They were like trying to put out a forest fire with a bucket. The fire was already too deep. It was too widespread. It wasn't just in one mine tunnel. It was in many. It was moving through different layers of coal. In August 1962, state mining officials came to Centralia. They saw the problem. They knew this was serious. A coal mine fire is not like a house fire. It's much harder to put out. They tried a bigger plan. They tried to dig out the fire. This is called strip mining. They used heavy equipment. They dug huge pits. They tried to expose the burning coal. Then they would put it out. This was a massive undertaking. It was expensive. It made a lot of mess. This effort lasted for months. It cost a lot of money, but it didn't work. The fire was too deep. The equipment couldn't reach it all. or the fire would just burn around the edges of the dig. It would move to new areas. The engineers learned a hard lesson. This fire was bigger than they thought. It was more complicated, it was harder to control. By 1963, the state realized they needed more help. They needed more money, they needed a different approach, they tried another method. They drilled holes into the ground. They pumped a special kind of slurry into these holes. The slurry was a mix of water, rock, and ash. The idea was to smother the fire, to fill the empty spaces with something that wouldn't burn. This would cut off the fire's oxygen. It would cool the burning coal. This method also failed. The slurry didn't spread evenly. It didn't fill all the gaps. The fire kept finding paths. It kept finding fresh coal. It just kept burning. The money was running out. The efforts were failing. The fire kept getting worse. The residents of Centralia were living with this growing problem. They saw the smoke. They felt the heat. They smelled the gases. Some people got sick. They worried about their children. They worried about their homes. The ground was becoming unstable. Sinkholes started to appear. These were not just small holes. They could be big. They could open up suddenly. There was a lot of debate. What should they do? Should they keep fighting it? Or should they just live with it? Some people thought it would burn itself out. They thought it would just eventually run out of fuel. Others knew it was a serious threat, but no one had a good answer. No one knew how to stop it. The fire had taken hold. It was under the town. It was part of the town now. This was not a quick fix. This was a long-term disaster unfolding. The early attempts were too little. They were too late. The fire had become too strong. The 1970s arrived. The fire was still burning. It was not a secret anymore. Everyone knew about Centralia's fire, but people were still living there. Life went on, sort of. Kids went to school. People went to church. They went to work. But under their feet, the earth was burning. It was a constant, unsettling presence. The signs of the fire grew more obvious and more dangerous. More sinkholes appeared. Some were small, some were huge. They could open up anywhere. In yards, in streets, people had to be careful where they stepped. Fissures opened in the ground. Steam came out of them. Hot gases escaped. The smell of sulfur was always in the air. People's gardens died from the heat. The ground was too hot to grow things. One day, a mail carrier put his foot through the ground. The ground just gave way. Luckily, he was okay, but it showed how unstable things were. The heat was intense in some places. People would walk on the sidewalks. They would feel the warmth through their shoes. Snow would melt faster in Centralia. It would melt in strange patterns. This was because of the heat from below. In 1979, a gas station owner put a dipstick into his underground tanks. He wanted to check the fuel level. The dipstick came out hot, really hot. He checked the temperature of the gasoline. It was 172 degrees Fahrenheit. That's very hot for gasoline. Gasoline is very flammable. This showed how intense the heat was. It was right under the town. It was under everyday places. Then, in 1981, a truly terrifying event happened. A 12-year-old boy named Todd Domboski was playing in his backyard. He was with his cousin. The ground just opened up beneath him. A huge sinkhole formed. It was 4 feet wide. It was 150 feet deep. Todd fell right in. His cousin managed to grab onto a tree root. Todd held onto a tree root too. He called for help. His cousin pulled him out. Todd was lucky to be alive. He was pulled from the brink. The hole was full of hot steam. It was full of deadly carbon monoxide. The ground had opened up right under him. This event made headlines around the world. It showed how deadly the fire had become. It was not just a smell. It was not just smoke. It was a clear and present danger. After Todd's accident, the government got more involved. They had been doing studies, they had been trying to figure things out, but this event made them act. They spent millions of dollars on new plans. They tried to put out the fire again. They considered digging a massive trench, a trench a mile wide and a mile deep. This would cost billions. It was too expensive. It was also very disruptive. They tried other ideas, but nothing seemed to work. The fire was too big. It was too deep. It was too complicated. It was in too many coal seams. It was estimated that there were enough coal deposits under Centralia to feed the fire for 250 years, or even longer. It was a fire that could burn for centuries. The community started to split. Some people wanted to leave. They saw the danger. They saw the futility of fighting the fire. They worried about their families. Others wanted to stay. This was their home. This was their family land. Their history was there. They didn't want to give up their town. They believed the government should fix the problem. They believed the fire could be put out. This split caused a lot of tension. Neighbors who had known each other for years argued. It was a sad time for Centralia. The fire was not just destroying the land, it was destroying the community itself. People lived with the fire, they lived with the smoke, they lived with the danger. They lived with the uncertainty. This went on for decades, decades of a town slowly being eaten alive from below. The federal government finally made a big decision. This was in 1984 they decided to act. They passed the Centralia Relocation Act. This act gave money. It gave money for voluntary relocation. The government would buy out the homes, they would move the residents. It was not about putting out the fire anymore. It was about saving the people. This was a hard choice for many residents. For some, it was a relief. They had lived with the danger for too long. They were ready to go. For others, it was heartbreaking. They didn't want to leave. They loved their homes. They loved their town. They felt like they were being forced out. They felt like their town was being taken from them. They had fought for their town. They had fought for their way of life. The buyouts started. People began to leave. Houses were emptied. Then they were demolished. The town slowly began to disappear. One by one, homes were torn down. Streets became empty. Shops closed. The post office closed. The schools closed. The churches still stood for a while, but their congregations dwindled. As people left, the town became quieter, eerily quiet. But the fire kept burning. The smoke still rose. The ground was still hot. The sinkholes still appeared. It was like the fire was reclaiming the land. It was erasing Centralia. A small group of residents refused to leave. They were known as the holdouts. They fought the government. They fought for their right to stay. They said they were not in danger. They said the fire was not as bad as the government claimed. They believed the government just wanted the coal. Or they believed the government was giving up too easily. They took their fight to court. Their legal battle lasted for years. It was a long, drawn-out process. They fought against powerful forces. They fought against public perception. They fought against the increasing evidence of danger. In 1992, the state declared eminent domain. This meant the government could take their properties, even if the residents didn't want to sell. The state condemned all properties in Centralia. They revoked the postal zip code. Centralia was no longer an official town. The remaining holdouts were allowed to stay, but only for their lifetimes. They were allowed to live in their homes, but they couldn't sell them. They couldn't pass them on to their children. Their homes would revert to the state after they died. It was a bitter victory for them. They got to stay, but their town was still dying around them. Their properties had no real value. The services they once had were gone. The demolition continued. Their houses became foundations, streets became overgrown with weeds, trees started to grow where homes once stood. The roads cracked and buckled from the heat. Fissures opened up. Smoke billowed out of the ground. Route 61, the main road through Centralia, became impassable. It was too damaged. It was too dangerous. A new section of highway had to be built around it. The old section was closed. It became known as Graffiti Highway. By the early 2000s, most of Centralia was gone. A few homes remained. A few people still lived there. But it was no longer a town. It was a ghost town. A place where buildings once stood, where lives were once lived. Now, it was just open land, land still burning, land still smoking. The evacuation was complete. The town was mostly erased. It was a slow, painful death for a community, all because of a fire that wouldn't quit. Centralia today is a strange place. It's not a town anymore, it's more like a scar on the landscape. The official population is very small, just a handful of people. These are the last of the holdouts. They are the few who stayed. They live in homes that stand alone, surrounded by empty plots. The plots where other homes used to be. The churches are mostly gone. The main streets are gone. The schools are gone. But the fire is still there. It's still burning. It's been burning for over 60 years now. The smoke still rises from the ground. You can see it in many places, especially on cold days. Steam comes out of vents. Holes in the ground release hot gases. The smell of sulfur is still present. If you walk there, you can feel the heat. The ground is warm to the touch. In some spots, it's very hot. The scientists estimate the fire could burn for another 250 years, maybe even longer. There's so much coal underground, enough to fuel it for centuries. It's deep, it's spread out. It's virtually impossible to put out now. The cost would be astronomical, the effort would be massive, and there's no guarantee it would even work. So the fire continues its slow burn. A constant reminder of what happened. Centralia has become a curiosity. It's a place people visit. They come to see a ghost town. They come to see the smoke. They come to see the damaged road. That old section of Route 61, the graffiti highway, became famous. People would drive on it. They would spray paint messages on the cracked pavement. It was an unofficial art gallery, a symbol of the town's strange end. But the state eventually buried it. They covered it with dirt in 2020. This was to stop people from trespassing, to stop the dangerous visits. So even that landmark is mostly gone now. What remains is a landscape of empty fields, of overgrown roads, of warning signs. Signs that tell you about carbon monoxide, signs that warn about unstable ground, signs that tell you to keep out. Yet, a few people still live there. They live with the smoke. They live with the hot ground. They live with the isolation. They are the last link to the Centralia that was. Centralia's story is a warning. It's about how a small mistake can lead to massive consequences. It's about human stubbornness. It's about the power of nature, even human-made nature like a coal mine fire. It shows how hard it is to reverse a disaster once it starts. The town is mostly gone. But its fire remains, a permanent scar on the earth, a burning monument to a lost town. And yes, it is still burning. It will burn for generations to come. A fire that will outlive us all. A fire that consumed a town, but somehow just keeps going.